We like to talk about the winning of the West, like it was a grand chess match of strategy, iron, and manifest destiny. We picture the blue-coated cavalry charging across the ridge in a cloud of dust, or the lone pioneer standing firm with a Winchester rifle. We tell ourselves stories of a fair fight for the soil, steel against steel, courage against courage. But the West wasn't won by generals. It was won by chemists. The most effective tool of ethnic cleansing in American history didn't fire a single bullet. It didn't require a bayonet charge or a tactical siege. It was transparent, it was cheap, and it was sold by the millions of gallons in unbranded wooden barrels. It was liquid fire, a chemical agent designed to snap the spine of entire nations from the inside out. While Washington was debating the morality of expansion, corporations were pouring chaos into the dirt. This wasn't commerce. This was a state-sanctioned biological intervention, meticulously disguised as a business venture. History tells you the frontier was won by the plow and the gun. History is lying. It was won by the bottle. The architecture of the trade step into a trading post in 1830, somewhere on the banks of the Missouri River. If you're looking for the fresh, pine-scented air of the wilderness, you won't find it here. This place doesn't smell like adventure. It reeks of rotting wood, stale tobacco, animal grease, and the sharp, acidic stench of industrial waste. This wasn't a tavern. It wasn't a place for a quiet drink. It was a liquidation center. The giants of early American capitalism, the Astor family, the Chouteaus, the massive conglomerates of the American Fur Company, had a biological problem. The indigenous nations of the Great Plains were too good at being warriors. They were disciplined, they were lethal, and they were resilient. They understood the value of their land, and they were hard-nosed negotiators who didn't care for the trinkets and beads that worked on the East Coast. To take the continent, the traders had to bypass the physical defense. They had to disable the command center. They needed a way to turn a high-functioning, sovereign society into a broken, dependent consumer base. They didn't need to kill the indigenous population. Not yet. They needed to make them complicit in their own bankruptcy. They needed to replace their autonomy with a biological craving. To the recipe: industrial trauma. The alcohol on the frontier wasn't the whiskey you know. It wasn't aged in charred oak barrels for a decade. It wasn't crafted with care. They called it fire water or liquid fire because it was raw, unadulterated chemical trauma. The recipe was simple, calculated for maximum damage at a minimum cost. It started with raw, industrial-grade grain alcohol, often shipped in bulk from the distilleries of Cincinnati or St. Louis. But that wasn't enough to hook a population. They needed to simulate the physical properties of a premium product while ensuring it acted like a narcotic. They mixed it on-site in a dirty bucket. They added tobacco juice to give it that aged amber color and a nicotine kick that hit the heart. And they added red pepper to simulate the burn of high-proof spirits for a throat that had never felt it. They added lead acetate, known as sugar of lead, to give it a sickening, metallic sweetness that masked the taste of rot. And then they added the catalyst, strychnine. In small doses, strychnine acts as a violent stimulant. It sharpens the senses, causes a spike in heart rate, and creates an intense physical high, followed by a crushing, agonizing withdrawal. It was the 19th century version of crack cocaine. It wasn't a beverage. It was a liquid infection designed to incinerate the nervous system. It ensured that the first drink wasn't just a choice. It was a total biological takeover. The goal was to destroy the internal organs while keeping the customer alive just long enough to sign away the land. Why did it work so effectively? It wasn't a lack of character or some inherent weakness of will. That is the lie we tell to comfort ourselves. The truth is pure, cold, clinical biology. The indigenous populations of North America had zero genetic resistance to ethanol. For thousands of years, their evolution had occurred without fermented sugars. This meant their bodies simply didn't have the software, the alcohol dehydrogenase enzymes, required to break down the toxin efficiently. For a European, alcohol was a vice that resulted in a heavy hangover. For a Native American, it was a total systemic hardware failure. The ethanol didn't just intoxicate, it flooded the bloodstream, locking out the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control, logical reasoning, and the protection of the family unit. The traders weren't just guessing, they audited the results. They observed how a single barrel could turn a seasoned diplomat into a desperate shell in a matter of months. Alcohol was the skeleton key. It slid into the brain, turned the lock, and opened the door for every treaty, every land grab, and every mass displacement in the 19th century. The traders and the government agents used alcohol as a strategic fishing attack. The play was simple, cynical, and repeated from the Great Lakes to the Rockies. The process of negotiation followed a standard operating procedure. First, you set out free barrels of liquid fire before the talks even began. You wait for the command structure to dissolve. You wait for the elders and the warriors to lose the ability to calculate the long-term cost of their survival. You wait until the chemical burn has replaced their vision of the future with a desperate need for the present. Then, you slide the paper across the table. It would be a treaty where millions of acres of ancestral land, hunting grounds, and sacred sites were surrendered for a few crates of rot gut and a promise of protection that would never come. It was legal cannibalism. By the time the chiefs woke from the chemical haze, their world had been liquidated for the price of a headache. The negotiation wasn't a meeting of minds. It was an audit of a drugged population. The signature on the parchment wasn't a choice. It was a neurological reflex. 1 gallon of strychnine-laced spirit for 10,000 acres. That isn't a trade. So that's an asset-stripping operation. The starvation we see in the mountains, like the Donner Party, was physical. But the alcohol on the plains brought a different kind of death. Social extinction. It was a hostile takeover of the collective psyche. The reports from the 1830s and 40s describe entire villages turned into ghost zones. The social fabric didn't just tear, it evaporated. A culture built on thousands of years of discipline, hunting mastery, and complex oral tradition was dismantled in a single generation. Discipline was replaced by desperation. The buffalo hunt, the backbone of plains life, was replaced by the line outside the trading post. They traded their horses, their only mobility and defense, for bottles. They traded their winter caches of furs, their only protection against the lethal frost, for a few hours of oblivion. It wasn't a choice any more than a virus is a choice. It was a system-wide failure. Indigenous leaders like Tecumseh and the prophets saw the hardware failing. They begged their people to turn away from the white man's poison, knowing that you cannot fight chemistry with a speech. You can't win a war when your warriors are fighting their own bloodstreams. They watched as the strongest men of the Great Plains were reduced to shadows, begging at the gates of the very forts that were erasing their children's future. The tragedy of the Great Plains didn't end in the 1800s. It left a scar on the DNA of the reservations that persists to this day. This wasn't an unfortunate side effect of progress. It was a calculated instrument of expansion. It was a weapon of mass destruction that came in a barrel. The US government officially banned the sale of alcohol to tribes, passing the Indian Intercourse Act in 1834. But they looked the other way while the caravans rolled west under the moonlight. Why? Because a drunk nation doesn't resist. A drunk nation doesn't remember where its borders were. A drunk nation doesn't organize a pan-Indian resistance or file lawsuits in federal courts. The illegal trade was the government's silent partner in the conquest of the West. It was the grease on the wheels of manifest destiny. The ROI, the return on investment, was undeniable. $1 spent on rot-gut whiskey saved the government $1,000 in military expenditures, and it was cheaper to poison a population than to fight them. It was a soft war with hard, permanent results. It was the most cost-effective conquest in human history. The Great American Desert wasn't tamed by the plow. It was pacified by the cask. We love the myths of heroic sheriffs and brave cavalrymen. We want the West to be a story of grit, glory, and the rugged individual. We want to believe that the land was won through the sheer force of character. But the West wasn't won by courage. It was won by cynicism and a ledger book. It was won by the bottle. We built our modern cities on the foundations of this chemical genocide. We poured the poison, waited for the silence, and then called it peace. We replaced the accountant's pen with the hero's sword in the history books, but the math remains. We are taught that the frontier was a place of limitless possibility. For the traders, it was. It was a place where you could turn a gallon of toxic waste into a real estate empire. It was a place where you could destroy a culture and be called a titan of industry. Morality is a luxury for the well-fed and the sober. When profit is measured in territories, a human being is just a container to be filled with poison. The liquid fire has burned out, but the ash it left behind is still falling over the Great Plains. We are still living in the world that alcohol built, a world where the ledger is always more important than the life. History is never what you think.